Hey, it's Sam from Sugar Spun Run, and today we are making these decadent caramel pretzel chocolate chunk cookies. Every time I put out a new cookie recipe, I'm pretty sure I say this, but this is my current favorite recipe. They're really good. You've got lots of great flavors from the sweet, chewy caramel to the crisp, salty pretzels. I think you are going to love these, so let's go ahead and get started. First thing you want to do is get your oven preheating to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Then grab yourself a large mixing bowl, and to this we're going to add 1 cup or 226 grams of softened unsalted butter. The inner mixing bowl. Look at that. We are not gonna leave that butter behind. We do not waste butter. Even though that tried to jump away from me. I'm gonna tear my scale because along with that, we are going to be adding 1 cup or 200 grams of light brown sugar. It should be firmly packed if you're using a measuring cup. And firmly packing it is actually a great idea whether you are using a measuring cup or not, because by doing so, we're going to break up any lumps in that brown sugar. So I always give it a firm pat, even if I'm not using measuring cup, which I never use measuring cups anymore. I use kitchen scale, which I highly recommend because they are a game changer. All right, we're not done there. We also need a 1/2 cup or 100 grams of granulated sugar. We're going to cream the butter and the sugar together until everything is light and fluffy. Now you could do this in a stand mixer if you have one, but today I'm just going to be using my electric hand mixer instead. So once that is well creamed, we're going to add our eggs. So you need 2 large eggs today, grab a blue one too. And ideally these should be at room temperature because all of your ingredients should really be the same temperature so that they combine nicely. And you should really always crack your eggs in a separate dish, just in case you get any shell in there, which we did not today. We'll go ahead and add these eggs into our dough, along with some vanilla extract. We'll be using 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract today, homemade. Love my homemade vanilla. We'll go ahead and stir the egg and vanilla into the dough. Looks like we have a pretty nice uniform dough, but of course we want to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl just to make sure everything is well combined. And we'll set this aside and grab a separate bowl for our dry ingredients. All right, today we are using cake flour, which I've been using in a lot of my recipes. This is 4 cups, which is 450 grams of cake flour. And the reason I opt for cake flour instead of all-purpose is because it gives this cookie a really soft, tender, melt in your mouth texture. We're making these cookies pretty large, and this just works really well. I use it with a lot of my gourmet cookies. If you don't have cake flour, I will include notes in the description or in the printable recipe over on my blog on how to use all-purpose instead. It's just important that you know that you're not going to get quite as soft and tender of a cookie. All right, all that info out of the way, we're going to add our baking powder. You need 1.5 teaspoons, which is 1/2 tablespoon, of baking powder and a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. We're also going to be adding some table salt. You want to add 3/4 teaspoon of table salt. Plus we are going to have some flaky sea salt that we'll be using to top the cookies because it's just so good. All right, let's go ahead and whisk everything together until it's well combined. You want all of those leavening agents nicely incorporated, all that salt well distributed. And let's bring back our butter mixture, which smells amazing because of that vanilla extract. We're going to gradually add the dry ingredients to the wet. Do this in like 3 or 4 parts. I'm going to start by just using my spatula to stir it together. If you want to use your mixer, you can just use it on a low speed and gradually add the flour. This dough is a bit on the drier side, so make sure you do add the flour in batches or it's going to just be way too stiff and dry for you to mix it properly. And this is also why it's really important, or recommended I should say, that you use a kitchen scale because it's much easier to be precise with your measurements when using the scale. Unfortunately, if you're measuring flour with a measuring cup, it's really easy to accidentally overdo it. Once your dough is nice and uniform, we're going to add our add-ins. You could use like 1.5 cups of chocolate chips, semi-sweet chocolate chips for this recipe if you'd like, or dark chocolate chips. But I really like using a chopped chocolate bar instead. So I've gone ahead and chopped up 6 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate. And I'm going to add this into my mixing bowl. All those little chocolate shavings in there too. They are great for flavor. And then pretzels. You're going to need a cup of crushed pretzel pieces. So I have these little tiny twists, and I'm just going to put them in a bag. And this comes out to be about 60 grams of pretzels. You can measure that before or after breaking them, but if you're breaking them up, measure your cup after you break them up. And you don't want super big pieces in here. The larger pieces, any of the pieces are going to soften some in the oven. So if the pieces are too big, they can seem stale in the cookie. So you want your pieces kind of small, but not like a fine dust. You don't want that. Not as fine as you would make them if you were making my pretzel crusted chicken that I just shared a little while ago. All right, let's go ahead and add this in. And then finally, caramel bits. You want an 11-ounce bag or about 1.5 cups of caramel bits. You can usually find these in the grocery store, like in the same aisle as the chocolate chips. Let's see if I can get them open so I can show you what they look like. They're just these little pieces of caramel, and they distribute very nicely. I tried this recipe a bunch of different ways with everything from like homemade caramel to caramel squares, like stuffing them in the middle of the cookie. And honestly, the caramel bits just really work best. I don't have a suggested substitute. Maybe you could buy those caramel squares and cut them into small pieces, but that's a lot of work. So caramel bits are the way to go. All right, let's stir in all these mix-ins. We've got our salty, we've got our sweet, we've got our chocolate. I don't know what else you could want from a cookie. So this is looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and start scooping our dough. I like these cookies to be nice and big, so I'm going to be scooping 3 tablespoons of dough, which is 2 of my 1.5 tablespoon size scoops. That math. I'm just going to form this into a ball, just because it looks nicer that way. And we'll space the cookies at least 2 inches apart on our baking sheet. All right, let's take these over to the center rack of our 350° Fahrenheit preheated oven. They're going to need to bake for about 12 to 14 minutes. When they're finished baking, the tops might look a little bit underdone still, and they're going to be pretty pale cookies, but the very bottom edges should be turning a light golden brown. All right, then within a minute of the cookies coming out of the oven, you're going to want to decorate them with some flaky sea salt. And then we'll let these cool on the baking sheet for at least 5 minutes before you move them to a cooling rack to cool completely. All right, that is how you make these incredibly decadent cookies. Make sure you try my blueberry muffin cookies next, or maybe my frosting filled cookies next. I think you're going to love all of them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. All right, I'm gonna break into this before I take a bite. Oh, I love these cookies. They're still warm. It's so good.